Hey folks, welcome to the lab. Delighted to have you here. I'm Topher with Sprowt Labs, and today I'm going to show you how to malt with your personal malt house. Let's go. So to get started, we're going to log into sproutlabs.com and create a recipe or choose an existing recipe in order to kickstart our batch. So I'm just going to be using a standard Pilsner recipe in this example, and we'll walk you through how to create recipes in a different video. But once you've either created or selected your recipe, you can go through, double check that all of your steep, arrest, germ, kiln details are looking good, and then we're going to go over to start a new batch, which is going to bring us to a batch scheduling page. And this is going to allow us to look out either at a calendar view or a timeline view to figure out when steep is going to be done, when germination is going to start, when we're going to be kilning, which is helpful since malting is usually a 7-day process. So it's helpful to be able to project out and know, am I going to be around at this time when kilning really needs to start? And you can play around and change start times in order to figure out how that'll impact your schedule for the week. So I'm going to choose a start time, and then I'm also going to assign this batch to my device. So over in the Manage section, I'll assign it to a demo device right now. And then I'm going to be good to go. I can double check that I know the quantity of barley that I'm using or other grain. So in this case, I'm doing a smaller batch, and then also making sure that I'm using the right Conical assigned. So then I'm going to get my grain out. In this case, I'm doing a little over 12 pounds, and I'm going to start with more than I'll actually finish with. So I'll tare my scale, I'll weigh out my barley, and in this case I'm going to be using just already cleaned seed that's shipped with your system. So I'll weigh this out, get to my 12.5 pounds, and then I'm going to get the machine all prepped and make sure it's ready. So you can check out our other video on how to set up your Acro if you haven't done that yet. And in this case, everything's going to be set up for the steep situation, steep setup. And I'm just going to make sure that on the inside of the Conical, I both have my small false bottom and I have the right angle tubing and filter cap for the water out line attached. And then I'm going to be good to go to pour that grain right in. And before I turn on the machine and get to washing, I want to make sure to take a sample out to be able to track my moisture content throughout the steeping process. You can head on over to the website, to the documentation area, and zoom in on the moisture content section to read up a bit more about how you're tracking moisture content, what the easy formula is to be able to track that specific number, and other information on that. Well, I think we'll put out some more videos on moisture content soon, since it's such an important component of malting. So in this case, I'm using just a simple T-ball, and I'm going to put about 15 grams of barley inside of it. Get that loaded up, and it's just important to have that at a starting dry weight, essentially, so that it's the same as the rest of the grain, pre-washing pretty much. Then I'm going to turn on my Acro. We'll get a loading screen, it'll connect up to Wi-Fi, and then it'll pull down some recipe data from your account. And once we're connected, we're then going to go into the malting section of the menu, and we'll select a recipe, which you need to do before washing so that the machine knows how much grain you're going to be malting. So I'll grab that Pilsner recipe, it'll download, and then I'm going to be ready to wash grain, which is also inside that malting menu. And when I'm washing grain, the machine's going to fill up some extra water compared to normal so that there's enough room to be able to vigorously stir it around and then use a sieve to take flotsam and chaff and immature kernels off the top. So that'll rise up that first time that you do it while the grain's still totally dry. You'll sort of get a matte float up with it, and then you can stir that up. Since this is seed, it's significantly cleaner than if you're growing your own or if you don't have as much cleaning equipment that you're sending your grain through. So I'm just gonna wash this twice, but depending on your batch of grain, you might need to wash it additional times. Once you've stirred it vigorously, as I was saying before, you're gonna take anything off the top that you need to, and the water is gonna get significantly dirtier. So this is really a first washing regime where we're getting rid of the worst of it, but you can really think about steeping also as an extended washing period where it's gonna get 3 additional soaks in water to help clean off any of the additional things from the field. Once the vessel's filled, and it's going to display that on the screen, and once you're done washing, you can then go back into the malting menu and select vessel drain, which will then initialize a draining sequence and send all that dirty water back down the drain. When you're washing, make sure to remember that there is that racking arm coming into the bottom of the conical, and so that's going to get in the way if you're putting a mash paddle or a hand in there. Make sure you don't hit that. After you finished your final washing stage, you're gonna want to check that filter. The machine will have a little reminder for you, and you'll go in once the water is totally out of the conical, and you will just unscrew that filter and clean it off to make sure that it's totally clean. So now we're ready to start the batch. So you've already downloaded the recipe, so you're just gonna go into the malting menu and select Start Batch. Before you do that, make sure to put your T-ball or similar setup with grain that you're tracking moisture content into the conical. And then it's going to tell you how many liters it'll fill up, and it'll start steeping. So it's going to fill that up. Make sure to include your temperature sensor into the grain bed, and we will get to steeping. During steeping, the machine's going to print out how far into the malting process it is and the active temperature in the temp sensor. And throughout the steep, it's going to be recirculating water and cooling it down and putting it back into the conical whenever the water's too warm. And then it will also be aerating the system and injecting compressed air in order to keep the grain cold and well aerated. When steeps are over, it'll then automatically drain and transition over to air rest. And during air rest, the grain's still going to be hanging out down in that bottom cone, and the machine will be opening that vessel valve and blowing cold humidified air up through the grain bed. And usually at the end of a steep or during an air rest is a great time to check the moisture content and be tracking it. Which is going to become the most important during the final steep of knowing if you have to add a little bit of time or start germination early, both of which are options within the malting menu. Once you're getting into your third steep, the aim is to steep out of your final steep and have the 99% chitting rate, so you can go through and follow the instructions that are also in the documentation section of the website of how to do a chit count and make sure that you've got great viable grain going into germination. But you'll start to see those white rootlets coming out at the end. So once we've steeped and air rested and we've got nice moist grain that's hit the moisture content that we're aiming for, we're gonna switch over and start germinating. So this is the moment in the malting process when you'll need to spend the most time with your grain in order to dump it out of the cone part of the conical and switch it over to the germination and kiln area. To do this, you need to unhook the conical from the Acro, and to do that, you're going to take off the tri-clamp above the vessel valve, and then you'll also unhook the quick release that's connecting the top water line to the conical. And then once you've done that, the Acro is able to wheel back on its casters once you've released the locks on that. A 5-gallon bucket or the flexible bucket both fit between the legs, and you'll need to probably put your hand into the 2-inch tri-clamp hole at the bottom to dig a little bit of the grain out to get it flowing, and you might have to hit the side of the conical once or twice, but the grain should dump out pretty easily. You're going to take off that racking port adapter. You'll have to slide off the tubing on the inside of the device and catch a little bit of grain that's going to come out of that 1.5 inch adapter hole. But then you'll have all of your grain out and the conical will be totally free from Acro. So it's a good chance to be able to clean it out. Just make sure that everything's a nice clean environment before you get into germination for a few days. So I usually take it over to our hose and just spray down the conical a little bit, and then get it hooked back up to Acro. So when you're hooking it back up to Acro, we need to switch over the duct setup, and that will entail unthreading and taking off the vessel valve and adapters. There might be a little bit of water inside the duct, so it's a good chance to just turn that upside down, make sure you drain out any water that's left over inside of that, which can come out either at the end of steep when it drains off the grain a little bit more, or just condensation from the moist air that's blowing up through. And then we're going to put on the germination and kiln duct setup. So that's just a straight shot tube with a tri-clamp adapter on the top and some insulation. So we'll screw that in, and then we'll attach the conical back, put on that tri-clamp. And then we're also going to put a cap onto the racking port adapter in order to make sure that all of the air is headed up through the grain bed and nothing's getting lost out the sides. So once those two things have been done on the bottom side of the conical, we're going to be ready to insert the false bottom and then get the grain back in there and jump right into germination. So the false bottom has 2 cable loops, easy to grab and angle it, and placing it down right in the point where the cone becomes a cylinder. Once that false bottom's in there, you're set up to pour that grain back in. Make sure to put the T-ball back in as well to continue tracking moisture content, and then insert the temperature probe as well. Also, I'd recommend putting the lid on. It doesn't have to be clamped on, as this isn't pressurized, but it's useful in helping to maintain temperature. We'll then go back onto the display on Acro, go into the malting menu and select Resume as prompted by the display, and germination will start up. During germination, we'll be blowing cold, humidified air right through the grain bed in order to maintain temperature, keep the grain nice and moist, and get CO2 out of there. You'll definitely see condensation on the walls since it's such a moist environment, and you'll see a fair bit of rootlet growth. The whole grain mass will increase significantly in volume as all of those rootlets grow out, and your main job is to check on the grain and turn it about once or twice a day to prevent it from clumping up. You can again go to the documentation section of the website to read about acro spires and modification, and we'll have more information in a future video about how to track modification and know when it's time to start kilning if you aren't just following a recipe. Once we go into kiln, we'll again select Resume, and that'll kickstart the free drying process. There are 4 kiln stages that are running currently on Acro. They'll increase temperature over time as we first take all the water out of the grain and then hit it with higher temperatures in order to add some amount of color and flavor. Once your kiln schedule is done and your grain is all dried down, you'll then need to decool the barley. And to do that, you can put a glove on and mix vigorously inside the conical once you've detached the duct and placed a 5-gallon down below to catch the culms that will be coming off. Mix away, and you'll see lots of rootlets come off the bottom. So now after you've deculmed, you are pretty much done. You can dump the grain out the bottom by removing the false bottom, or use your scoop to take the grain out the top. Now you've got some nice freshly malted grain ready to go, either to store in an airtight bag or to start using in your next project right away. Awesome. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that this has been helpful for you in getting your system set up and malting away with it. And look for some more videos soon, digging into other components of the malting process and how you can use your Acro to really explore new flavors and new grains and new malting opportunities.